Okay, guys, so today we are continuing on with learning about plants. And like I said in the last lesson, we are now going to be zooming in to focus on just all of the different specialized structures that exist within the leaf of a plant. So in this lesson, we are going to be going over the different structures and their functions. We're also going to be talking about how gas exchange occurs. So you do have to know all of the different structures. You have to be able to identify them on a diagram and say what each of those structures does. You also need to know the different processes of the gas exchange, and you have to know in a fair amount of detail how guard cells work to open and close the stoma in order to regulate gas exchange. So we're just going to kind of start at the top of the leaf and kind of work our way down through the different structures that exist on the inside and then finish off with the bottom of the leaf. So the very top of the leaf is covered in something called the cuticle, which is a thin waxy coating that helps to reduce water loss. And then the upper epidermis is right below that. It is just a single layer of cells on the top of the leaf. It is what actually produces the cuticle, so it secretes that waxy coating. It also helps to filter light that's coming in so that the chloroplast in the layer underneath doesn't get damaged from the UV radiation. Underneath the upper epidermis, we have the palisade mesophyll. That is where all of the cells that contain the chloroplast are, and therefore that is where photosynthesis happens. So it's near to the top, so it has lots of sunlight, but not at the very top because then it would get damaged from the UV radiation. Underneath the palisade mesophyll, we have the spongy mesophyll. It's called spongy because there's a lot of gaps and holes in it. The cells are very loosely packed together. And the point of that is that all of those air pockets allow gases to move into and out of the leaf very easily. So the palisade mesophyll is where photosynthesis is happening. In order for photosynthesis to happen, we need carbon dioxide. So carbon dioxide filters in from the bottom of the leaf, goes through the spongy mesophyll, through all of those air pockets until it gets to the palisade mesophyll, where the carbon dioxide is then used for photosynthesis. During the process of photosynthesis, oxygen is produced, and that oxygen can move again through all those holes of the spongy mesophyll and then leave through the bottom of the leaf. The spongy mesophyll also helps to insulate the leaf and provides some storage for some of the products of photosynthesis until they can be taken away through the phloem tubes. We also have the vascular bundle, which is the phloem and xylem tubes that allow material to be transported through the plant. As we've talked about before, the xylem tubes move water and minerals up the plants from the roots to the stems and leaves, where the water can be used in photosynthesis. And then phloem tubes move sugar and nutrients down from the leaves to the rest of the plant, also up from tubers where sugars are stored to the rest of the plant. So phloem tubes move sugars both up and down. Xylem tubes move water up only. The sclerenchyma is a protective layer that surrounds the vascular bundle. It also helps provide some extra strength and support to the leaf. And then underneath all of that, we have the lower epidermis, which, like the upper epidermis, is just a single layer of cells. This one is just at the bottom of the leaf instead of the top of the leaf. And then within that lower epidermis, we have things called guard cells. Guard cells are little like kidney bean shaped cells found mostly in the lower epidermis, and they surround something called the stoma, which is just an opening in the lower epidermis. The guard cells are responsible for regulating gas exchange. What that means is that they open or close the stoma, open or close that opening in the bottom of the guard cell to either stop gas exchange or allow gas exchange. So allow gases to go in and out of the leaf or stop them. Guard cells also contain chloroplast. They're the only epidural cells that contain chloroplast. So the only cells of the upper or lower epidermis that have chloroplast. And then the stoma is actually not a cell at all. It is just a structure on the leaf. It is an opening found mostly on the lower epidermis that is where gases can go into and out of when the guard cell allows it. So this is just kind of a diagram of what this all looks like. At the very top here, we have the cuticle, that waxy layer that helps prevent moisture loss. Underneath that, we have the upper epidermis, that single layer of cells that makes the cuticle and filters incoming light to protect the chloroplast, which are in the layer underneath. So in the palisade mesophyll, all of these little kind of dark ovally spots are all of the chloroplast. So that is where photosynthesis is happening. Then these light blue shapes underneath, that is the spongy mesophyll. As you can see, there's lots of spaces for gases to move through that spongy mesophyll. This circly bit here, the outside, is the sclerenchyma. Here it's referred to as the bundle sheath, but we call it the sclerenchyma, which is its scientific name. And within that, surrounded by that sclerenchyma, we have the xylem and phloem cells, so our vascular bundle. This whole thing all together, both the xylem and phloem tubes and sclerenchyma, is all called the vascular bundle. Then at the bottom here, we have the lower epidermis, and then right here and here and here, we have the guard cells. You can tell that they're guard cells because there's a little opening between them. That little opening is the stoma. So gas exchange is really important. That is why the role of guard cells is so important. Gases are produced inside the leaves through two main processes, cellular respiration and photosynthesis. Cellular respiration occurs in all plant and animal cells, and that is when glucose is converted into ATP energy. So glucose is the stored form of energy. It is stored in the chemical bonds of the glucose molecule. That glucose can react with oxygen to produce carbon dioxide, water, and that usable form of ATP energy. This is much more common in animals. This happens constantly in animals. It happens to a much lower extent in plants. But the carbon dioxide that is produced then does need to escape the leaf. That does happen mainly at night when photosynthesis isn't happening, but again, it's to a much lower extent. Plants use a lot more carbon dioxide than they produce, which is not true for animals. Photosynthesis is the main form of gas production in leaves. So photosynthesis happens in the chloroplast of all plant cells, and it converts energy from sunlight into glucose, which is again a stored form of chemical energy. In order to do that, carbon dioxide is required and oxygen is produced. So you have the sunlight energy reacting with water and carbon dioxide to form oxygen and glucose, and then the oxygen gets released. Cellular respiration and photosynthesis are opposite or reverse reactions of one another. You can like read them forwards and backwards and they're the same as each other. The only difference being the type of energy and the reactions. So with photosynthesis, the type of energy is sunlight. In cellular respiration, the type of energy is ATP. So all the gases that are produced have to be able to leave. You also, in order for both of those processes to happen, need to be able to get gases into the plant. All gas exchange happens via diffusion. So gases will diffuse into the leaf and diffuse out of the leaf. So for instance, if we're talking about photosynthesis happening, the oxygen that's produced from photosynthesis builds up inside the leaf until there is a higher concentration of oxygen inside the leaf than what is in the atmosphere. And so the oxygen diffuses from the high concentration area in the leaf to the low concentration area of the atmosphere. And then the opposite is true for carbon dioxide. Because the carbon dioxide in the leaf is constantly being used up, the concentration of carbon dioxide in the leaf is very low. And so the carbon dioxide moves from the higher concentration area of the atmosphere and diffuses to the lower concentration area inside the leaf. Again, all of that gas exchange is controlled by the guard cells opening or closing the stoma, and then the gases move through the spongy mesophyll to the palisade mesophyll where the chloroplast is. Okay, so this is a view as if you were looking at the bottom of the leaf. So the stoma, which are called stomata if you're just talking about one of them, are these like dark holes here. Again, they're not a cell, they're just a hole. So it's just a structure on the leaf. And then these little light green bean-shaped cells that go around them are the guard cells. So there's 2 guard cells for every stoma. If you just left the stoma open all of the time, the plant would die because it would lose too much water vapor, essentially through like evaporation. And so that's why the guard cells have to be there to close the stoma if too much water is being lost. So we're going to go through the kind of process of how the guard cells regulate that gas exchange. Again, there are 2 of them around the outside of each stoma that can open and close the stoma. When it is light out, then the guard cells need to open the stoma so that carbon dioxide can get into the leaf so photosynthesis can happen while sunlight is available. As soon as light hits the leaf, it is going to trigger the guard cells to have potassium ions pumped into them. When potassium ions get pumped into the guard cell, you have a buildup of dissolved solids, in this case potassium ions, inside the guard cells. So that is going to cause water to rush into the guard cells just because of osmosis. And as the guard cells fill up and become turgid, their walls are not symmetrical. Sorry, their outer and inner walls are not symmetrical. The outer walls are thinner than the inner walls. And so because of that, the guard cell is going to buckle outwards as pressure is put on that outer wall that's not as strong. It's going to cause the guard cells to buckle open as they fill up. So that's really it. Sunlight hits the guard cell, potassium ions are pumped in. Because I'm saying the word pump, that is active transport. Water then follows because of osmosis, which is passive transport, and that causes the guard cells to buckle open and open up that stoma. When it's time for the guard cells to close, so when it's dark out, as soon as the light leaves, the potassium ions are no longer being pumped in. And because there's a buildup of potassium ions inside of the guard cells, as soon as you stop pumping them in, they will just naturally diffuse out of the high concentration area inside the guard cells to the lower concentration area in the surrounding leaf. As the potassium ions diffuse out, which again is passive, the water will then follow, which is also passive. And so then the guard cells become limp. They no longer have that turgor pressure that's pushing them outwards and open, so they just become limp and close up again. This can also happen during the day if there's just not enough water available. So if the plant is dehydrated and the sun is out, the sun is still going to be causing potassium ions to get pumped into the guard cell, but there's just not going to be enough water to create the turgor pressure to actually open the guard cell. So guard cells will remain closed if there's not enough water. Which is good because then if the guard cells were open, it would continue to lose more water through evaporation. So you want guard cells to remain closed when the plant is dehydrated. So this is kind of a diagram of what this looks like. These blue parts here are the vacuoles, which is where water is stored inside all plant cells, but this is specifically inside the guard cell. So this is when it would be closed, when it's flaccid, so when it doesn't have that turgor pressure, and then sunlight would hit the guard cell. That would cause these potassium ions to get pumped into the guard cell, again using active transport, water will follow because of osmosis. So water goes in and starts filling up those vacuoles inside the guard cell. And as those vacuoles fill, it creates the turgor pressure that buckles the guard cells open. Okay, so photosynthesis, obviously very important in the leaf. That is the main job of the leaf. And again, what you're doing is you're taking energy that's in the sun and converting it into stored energy, which is stored in the chemical bonds of glucose, using carbon dioxide and water. The sugar that's formed is the useful product for the plant that is going to be stored as like its food source. And then the oxygen is actually just a waste product. It is just going to be released into the atmosphere. It's not useful to the plant. In order for photosynthesis to happen, you do need the sunlight to filter in through the upper epidermis and get to the palisade mesophyll cells where the chloroplast is. You also need water to be carried up from the roots, so they're absorbed. The water is absorbed by the root hairs in the roots and then gets transported from the xylem tubes up to the leaf. And then you have the carbon dioxide that is going to diffuse in through the stoma when the guard cells are open, through the spongy mesophyll until it gets to the palisade mesophyll as well. And then chlorophyll is not actually a reactant, but it is needed for this reaction to happen. So chlorophyll is considered a catalyst. It doesn't take part in the reaction, but it does need to be present for the reaction to happen. Chlorophyll is found in the chloroplast. It is what makes leaves green. And then the products are, of course, the glucose, which, as I've said, is the stored chemical energy. It'll move down through the phloem tubes to where it is stored in the tubers, which are underground. And then the oxygen will just diffuse out of the stoma whenever the guard cells are open. Okay, that is it for today's lesson. Make sure that you go over the diagram and kind of review all of the different functions of those structures. Also make sure that you know in detail how to open and close the guard cells.